Good afternoon to everyone and welcome to the 7th Methane Monday this year, done in cooperation, as you know, between Energy Community Secretariat, GAE and Markogas. We are doing this for the third year in the row, and I am glad and grateful that we actually made it full circle from European strategy on methane emissions towards actually the final, almost final text of the regulation. My name is Karolina Čegir. I work as a senior gas expert in the Secretariat, and today we will have two presenters. This is overview what we did it this year, but there is much longer overview what we did it in 3 years time. I mean, which topics were included. Today, it's going to be focus on this legislation, piece of legislation to be very soon, and having, of course, great impact on gas infrastructure and gas producers. And we invited European Commission to come and to present, but understandably they said it's still really not the final text of the regulation. It's still not a mandatory piece of legislation, so we will do it when it's really approved. But from industry sides, more or less, it's already strong view and concerns and actually issues to be tackled and to be done, and industry to be prepared. That's why we are grateful today to have actually representatives of two big associations from GAE, from Gas Infrastructure Europe, and also from international oil and gas producers. So that would be from my side. And I will invite now to yes.
I can.
Between two screens and now one completely disappeared, but I am glad to invite Dr. Bastian Lang to present GIE perspective on this new legislation to come and to see what gas infrastructure of Europe thinks about this regulation. So Bastian, please take the floor.
Thank you very much, Karolina, for this nice introduction. I hope you all can see my slides.
Yes, I can confirm we can see it.
That's great. So my name is Bastian Lang. I'm working for a German TSO called Gascade, and I'm here to represent GIE because I'm there also the co-chair of the methane emission working group. And I'm sharing the group there together with Pascal Alas and Eva Henning and also Gregor Frey. And right now I have based my whole presentation on the December document. I'm focusing on TSO and DSO perspective because I think we have a huge gap within the regulation between TSO upstream and downstream. So therefore, it's a part of a limited aspect. So I will not go into all the details because I think it's quite challenging to discuss the whole document within half an hour. So I will be more on the surface. But when there are questions, I can try to answer. And yeah, so right now we think that the regulation will come in force at the end of Q1 or in the middle of the second quarter of next year. There will be quite some delegated acts, one on the methodology to calculate methane intensity, also on LDAR, MRV, and venting and flaring. And there will also be some implementing acts from the Commission to be done, which makes the document not yet absolutely final that we know everything. But I think right now is at least the point where you should start to think about how to acknowledge all what is happening there and how to get prepared. because I think there is a lot to do, and I think it's very important that we start now. So the scope, I think this is undeniable to abate methane emissions, but also to get a better view of that, to have precise numbers. The sectors which were tackled is oil, fossil gas exploration and production, and also the gas transmission and distribution, and of course also coal mines, and in addition also the importer requirements, which is a whole chapter within the regulation now. So what is very important, at least for us as TSOs and DSOs, is the cost for the regulated operators. They should be recognized in our tariffs. This is good. The question is how quickly, and this is something what we have to see when the regulation is there, how this will work out with our national regulators. And ASA then has to do benchmarks every 3 years about the investment costs, but most likely in general costs, because there's also reporting, verification, and so on in. So this is something where we have to see where we are. But I mean, at least for our company, it would mean that we have to distinguish our costs a bit more, because right now we do not have separated them everywhere. This is something what we could prepare now. Yeah, authorities, Article 4, 5, and 6. The authorities will be designated within 6 months. So within 6 months after the regulation coming into force, we know to whom to talk, because I think this is very important within the regulation, because I think there's a lot of steps which we have to discuss with them how to go on, because we have, they are our authorities, right? And therefore we need more information from them. And what will also be to be done by them is that they have to do a first inspection of our sites within the first 1 month after the regulation comes into force, and later on risk-based and additional unannounced. But nevertheless, I think that 21 months will be quite challenging for them to get across all sites, or at least to all operators. Then general topics. So the publications of the surveys which will be done on our installations, they should be published, and also the methane emissions we would have. So like it is right now already with OGMP, there the emissions will also be published, but I guess that in future they will be published on a more detailed base, so that more people know what is actually happening with the systems. Then within Article 7, lots may be reasoned and may be done by every legal person. This puts us under pressure, and we have to see how this will be done within the future. But we all see that this might become a threat to us. The general mitigation obligation, of course, we have to prevent and minimize the methane emissions in an appropriate way. And we all know that with all the money on the world, we could prevent all the emissions. But the question is, how far do we go? And this is what we then have to see, what will be within the standards, how far we go, and what can be done in a good way. And in Article 30, a lot of possible penalties are stated, and the height of these have to be confirmed or determined by the member states and reported to the EU Commission within 12 months. And then we come to the more practical part, I would say, and this is monitoring and reporting. I have differentiated between operated and non-operated assets. The non-operated are here in green or in light green, and the operated in dark green. So a first report based on generic emission factors or better must be submitted within 12 months. So for most of the parties or organizations who are already members of OGMP, I think this is not a big issue. For smaller companies or companies who are not member there, this will be quite challenging because also after 18 months, there should be one based on direct measurements. And this is quite challenging. Non-operated, of course, firstly after 30 months. And after 30 months, the report for the operated assets also must be supplemented by site level measurements and approved by a verifier, so an external auditor. We have to see who will be able to do this, and also site level measurements. I think you will hear something later on, but from IOGP, but I guess for TSOs and DSOs, this is quite challenging to get appropriate site level measurement technologies in place, which are able to detect our, I would say, lower emission levels. So this is quite challenging, and we are looking for solutions there. And when these reports are done after 30 months, so it will come to an automated circle. So it will be every 31st of May. So this is like today with OGMP. This will always be the date when to report. And also the report should be based on the National Inventory Report and the OGMP report. So therefore, this is quite good that they would not divide very much, so that it will be some way of a very similar document where how we have to report and not different ones. And later on, there should be technical standards on how to do monitoring and reporting. Then leak detection and repair. So 9 months after entry into force, an ELDA program must be submitted to the national authorities. And when we will have changes later on, of course, we have to inform them. And also the authority might request changes. And after 12 months, the first survey must be completed. And this is, I think, quite challenging. The good part here is that when you have done ELDA surveys before, I think it's 2 years, up to 2 years before, you can take them also into account and can consider them then this request as done. But at least you have to have an ELDA campaign done already within 12 months after implementation. And also new developed standards and best available technology has to be created. Of course, not every detail on how to do an ELDA is ready now, and there is no standard procedure how to do it. Therefore, this has to be created. Then the frequencies for ELDA campaigns on sites must be done according to the annex. This is I will present on the next slides. And the minimum detection limits and detection technologies have to be specified by the European Commission in an implementing act within 12 months. Meaning, when we do now the ELDA, we have to look on the repair threshold rather than on the detection limits. This will put us under pressure because we do not know what, I would say, ELDA technology to buy. We can only use the one we have because I think most of them will look on these thresholds. I will show on the next slides afterwards. What you will see here is or are the frequencies for doing a leak detection and repair on DSO and TSO grid. I do not implement here the part for the upstream companies because this is totally different, and also for coal and so on, it's different. So I'm focusing here on DSO and TSO. And I think what you can see here is that we have a differentiation between type 1 and type 2 ELDA campaigns. So type 1 is rougher. For example, you could use an OGI camera. And type 2 is more precise. There you cannot use an OGI camera. Most likely you have to use FID measurements, the flame ionization detector or something similar to detect even tiny, smaller leaks. And you have to do it on all your equipment everywhere. And then you have also to have a list of all your equipments. So this is stated in the Annex 1A, I guess. So that you need to know where you have to measure and what the results for each equipment are. Yeah, I would not go here too much into detail, only that we have a differentiation for TSOs or also some DSOs which have regulating and metering stations and also compressor stations and then valve stations. So the more assets you have on a station, for example, a compressor station is quite dense with equipments and also regulating and metering station. They have to do quite a lot of LDAR, but when you're more outside and you are on a valve station, you have only less equipment, there you have higher frequencies. And for the DSOs, it's more based on the material which is used within their system. So for example, gray cast iron is not, I would say, that good. So therefore it's expected that there are more leaks. Therefore you have to do more LDAR campaigns. And for example, when you use PVC everywhere, then you only have every 36 months an LDAR campaign. The repairs, this is what I've mentioned before. The repair thresholds are stated within the regulation, and I think this is the first where you have to look when you do the first LDAR campaign. So above ground, the LDAR type 1 is 7,000 ppm or 17 grams. So this is possible with an OGI, for example. The repair thresholds above ground on a normal station is 500 ppm or 1 gram, underground components 1000 ppm or 5 gram. I think this will be quite challenging because right now I do not know any technology which is capable for TSO grids to detect these kinds of leaks. So therefore we have to see how to tackle this. And then there is the point below sea level and below seabed. This is 7,000 ppm or 17 grams. So we have to see. And larger leaks should be prioritized. And in total, we have to do some some paperwork, I would say, because within 5 days we have to do the first repair try. And normally the repair should be done within 30 days. But there are exemptions. So when it would take longer and you have a reason for this, why the repair should take longer, for example, safety, administrative or technical considerations, for example, a shutdown, then you can inform your authority and have to submit a repair plan within 12 days after detection. And within that, you have to minimize the leak and then make a statement how and when you wanted to repair the leak. And therefore, you need the justification. And all leaks which emit less than the repair threshold, they have to be retested at least once within 3 months to make sure that the emissions have not increased. And all the surveys have to be submitted and repairs have to be submitted to the national authority that they can check whether you have be compliant with the regulation or not. Now, a very, I would say, challenging topic, at least for the TSOs, is limits to venting and flaring. In principle, it's generally forbidden to vent or flare gas. You are only allowed to do that in case of emergency or malfunction. So this is why we have the vent stacks on the compressor stations, for example, because then we have a technical issue and this is fully recognized. And the gas should always be reused where it's technical feasible. And this statement, technical feasible, has to be defined somewhere, and therefore also standards are needed to describe what is technical feasible, because this is a very broad word and this must be somehow limited or described better. And then where a site is built or refurbished, the operator shall only use commercial available zero emitting devices in this area, which is changed or rebuilt or whatsoever. I think this is very useful to do that in future. And then when you wanted to change something within your system, or you have to, it can be possible that you cannot get the equipment or whatsoever, and then you have to submit a plan to your national authority, and then you can get some time. I think here in this case it's 18 months that you can then implement this technology. Yeah, nevertheless, we need the standardization, that it's clear what we have to do and what we have not to do, and this will be implemented via a delegated act. And then yeah, we have to see that later on when we have to implement the non-venting equipment everywhere, right? Because this is also part of the regulation that everywhere this kind of equipment have to be used. I will go to the questions afterwards because I only see them popping up now and I cannot react as quickly. So I'll go once through the whole presentation and then go to the questions. Then we have the flaring articles 16 and 17. So in emergency or malfunction events, they should be reported to the local authorities. There is also the fact that when it takes longer than 8 hours and it's not intended and so on, you also have to report it, but most likely when a vent or a flare is used in a TSO or DSO grid, it's a planned event, right? We are just venting. When it's an emergency, we are not flaring normally. When it's an emergency, I think this could be different for storage operators, for example. So therefore, they have different challenges here. And then the flare or other combustion unit which is installed must have an automatic ignition or a pilot flame and a combustion efficiency of 99%. We have to see how to prove that, but this is at least the demand which arises from the regulation. And then after 18 months, it must be ensured that all flares or other combustion devices meet the requirements of the before mentioned requests, so automatic ignition, pilot flame, and combustion efficiency of 99%. And then there are also some testing rules in Annex 3. When before you use the flare, you have to test several things, but I will not go into details there. And then, but this is also not for us because we are just using or mostly using mobile flares. It always must be ensured that the flare is running and that it's not venting. For us, that's not an issue because our operators are standing right next to it. But when you have somewhere operated flares where you are not available or when you are not close to it, you somehow must have to be sure that the flare is really lit. So on importer requirements, I have not much because a lot of this has been moved to Annex 8. So therefore, I'm not in detail check the whole text about that. Sorry for that, because we as TSOs are not really hard tackled by this because we do not own the gas. So the traders and also maybe the upstream companies are more tackled by this. So most likely we'll hear a bit more from Emils later on. Yeah, nevertheless, by 9 months and by the 31st of May every year thereafter, importers shall provide the information which are set out in Annex 8. And by 12 months and every 31st of August and every year thereafter, member states shall submit these informations then to the commissions. And now, what are the challenges we have as TSO and DSOs identified within the methane regulation? So first of all, we have a huge need for additional well-trained staff, right? Because the elder campaigns, we need the staff, and which is really hard to get right now. And also additional contractors and verifiers are hard to get right now. We do not know who will be or who will become the verifiers, and also the contractors are not broadly available. Only less companies are there, and when now everybody is trying to get now contractors to do the elder, it will become quite challenging. In general, we have very short timelines to do the first elder survey. I mean, at least for the DSO, I think this will become quite challenging because they had totally different time frames in the past, and now they have really been skewed together, and now they must be very quick. And I think this will be really, really challenging also for some TSOs. The MRV report is also quite challenging. I mean, we are OGMP members, so a lot of TSOs are OGMP members. So for them, the first report is not that challenging, but for all the companies who are not OGMP members, it will become quite challenging because you have to think about a lot of information you need beforehand to fulfill this demand. And then the investment cost decision, we have to take at undefined requirements. So we do not know right now for ELDA and MRV, the measurement technology which we are allowed to use or which requirements we have to meet. Therefore, we could not decide. And this is sometimes a bit challenging because when you invest money and 1 year later, you know the precise demand from the commission, and then you have to buy something different. This is not good. And also on venting and flaring, standard technology must be defined that we know what kind of technology, in which cases we have to use, how and when, because for example, measurement devices, yes, there exist measurement devices with very few bypass methane, but you cannot use them everywhere. The technology has to become better, that you can use it everywhere. And so it's ongoing, that it's defined what we have to use. And this is really a pity that we don't know it yet. And what is very important also for all of us is the need for the instant acknowledgement of our costs by the regulators. And there we have to see how this will work. At least here in Germany, we will make most likely very soon after the regulation is in place, a meeting with our regulator that they know what is coming up and that we get our costs acknowledged. This is this in a very short manner, I would say. So I think we now could go to the questions, but I don't know how I can see them. Maybe you can ask them directly.
Yeah, I will. Thank you very much, Bastian. That was a really great overview of regulation and what is in the text, and really underlining the issues related with deadlines. I mean, and what is still kind of not agreed, and with, I mean, also overview on procedure in EU. So we had the first question, and that was by Mr. Debat, saying who would be then independent verifier in the sense of proposed regulation.
Yeah, so this is what we have to see, right? What the independent verifiers will be. I do not look into the details whether, for example, they have to be aggregated. I'm not absolutely sure about that. This is what we have to see, right? And then they also need some kind of document again, which they have to be aggregated. So this is upcoming. We don't know yet.
And then we have two questions related to ELDAR.
Mm-hmm.
So maybe Casper or Bart would like to raise, I mean, to to unmute themselves and then ask question directly.
Yeah.
Yes, hello, this is Casper here. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Great. My question is whether these thresholds on the detection limits and ELDAR surveys, are they subject to change, or are these the final agreed limits on whether or not we have to repair our leakages?
So, I mean, the whole document we have seen right now is the latest version. We think that this is technically applied, and I think they have this, the trilogue, I think next week or something, to that this document can go further. I think it was on the first slide. So therefore, I think that the repair thresholds will stay like that, yes. But what we don't know is the detection limits, right? This is what is upcoming.
Okay, yeah, thank you.
Hi, Bastian, this is Bart Waltrix. I have a question about ELDAR, and more specifically about the remeasurements after repair. I don't know whether it's deliberate or it's an omission, but the text is not very clear and could be interpreted that a repaired leak needs to be measured twice. One, a first time pretty immediate, and then a second time before the end of 45 days period. It also could be interpreted as only one measurement after repair. Any view on that?
This is a very good question. I mean, I try to stick away from interpretation, right? Because this is not the final wording and the lawyers from the commission did not check it. So I will wait before they did that, before I start interpreting, because I think tiny words can change the whole idea of the sentence, right? And this is where I'm waiting. I don't know what they will come up with.
It wasn't discussed in the previous version, so it could come up as a big surprise, but with important impact, of course.
Yes, of course. Yeah, we have to see. I don't know yet. Sorry.
Thank you.
Thank you, Bastian. And now we have the question from Maria Olszak in regards to regulators and how this will look like. So Maria, if you like, put the question, I mean, explain the question.
Hi, Carolina. So I think it was already mentioned during the presentation. It's just I'm very curious how the situation looks like in different member states, because I think NRACE could be more or less likely to acknowledge the costs incurred by the company. So I was just wondering to which extent it could be perceived as a challenge to the implementation of the regulation.
Yeah, so I mean, I was looking on a German perspective, right? So in Germany, we have these called photo year, where you have the costs, and then there are the shoulder years, and the year where the costs are applied will then be used for the whole next period, how much money you're allowed to earn. And the picture year in this case is in 2025, but you can imagine that when the regulation will come into force, I think, for example, in mid of next year, then some investments will be taken later, so not in 2025. And then you create the peak in the shoulder year and not in the picture year. And this might then become an issue for us, because then not all costs might be recognized. And therefore, we will have to discuss with our regulator how to deal with this.
Thank you for that. And we have one more question related to regulators, but maybe more actually experience from US. And then with that one, we will actually close the part after GIE presentation, because usually we do this question and answers at the end, but to my understanding, Bastian will have to leave us. So
yes, sorry for that.
yeah, no problem. So one more question or comment from US colleagues, let's say. I can see from Michal.
Yes, hello, good morning from my side, and guten Nachmittag für euch. Ich habe noch family in the north part of Germany. I have family,
okay.
So I just want to acknowledge, one, thank you for your presentation. It's very informative. I've been trying to keep tabs on how those regulations are changing at home in Germany. And here in the US, of course, I play with it every day. In fact, I'm in the middle of writing MIQ reports as we speak. And but the challenge with the regulators and the regulations are always at the forefront, because we're using different technologies. I'm a certified OGI camera operator. I've done the FID route, but I've tried to not do that anymore. I look at the blend of technologies. So my company, or the company I work for, we use all the different technologies, OGI, FID, to establish those flow rates. But it's essential to find them first. And I just wanted to say how much I appreciate the challenge you face there. So thank you.
Yeah, I mean, we have to see how this will all turn out, because I think that this is quite a challenge, and I hope that the technology will evolve faster due to the regulation, right? Because then it's easier for us to get forward, because I mean, especially to getting from ppms to flow rate will become quite challenging, I would say.
Yes. Yeah, and especially, some of the technologies with the OGI cameras proclaim that they can measure the flow rates, and we've not had very much success with that yet. So I'm sure that's the same there. So thank you again.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Vielen Dank.
Yeah, thank you, Michal, for actually putting the bridge to another presentation, which is then more related to oil and gas producers. And with that, I would like really to thank you very much to Bastian and to GIE for contribution. We will upload presentation. We will have a recorded part, and as I assume, we will come back to this regulation when it's approved once again.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you, Bastian. And please, Emils, take the floor. So this is another association, and this is focused more, of course, on oil and gas producers and putting this international actually component, because this will be very much related to these provisions on import of gas and methane emissions to the European Union. So Emils, please take the floor.
Can you hear me?
We can hear you, and for a while we saw your presentation, but now disappeared.
Let me get it back on.
Share it once again.
Yeah. Can you see it now? Yeah.
It's coming. It's still not in full screen mode, but it's visible. Oh, yes, all is fine. So please go ahead.
2 seconds. I'm trying to arrange the screen because I have some notes as well. Perhaps if that's okay, is this readable if I leave it like this? I have some notes on the screen, other screen, that I want to check. I hope this is fine with you.
I think should be fine. I mean,
okay, perfect.
If it's work for you, it will work for us.
Perfect, thank you. And then we'll share the slides as well.
Yes, slides and the
afterwards,
report.
So we'll have an overview of that. Perfect. So thank you for having me over the Methane Mondays. So my name is Emils Lagzdins. I'm a senior policy officer working with the International Association of Oil and Gas Producers based out of Brussels. So today I will give a brief overview of the EU methane regulation. I mean, Bastian already spoke about a chunk of it, so I will try not to repeat myself, including the timeline and what's to come next. But before that, a short introduction also of the organization I represent, IOGP Europe. So, as I said, we're based out of Brussels. We are the policy arm of the IOGP Global. We very much work on advocacy, representing the views and positions of the exploration and production oil and gas companies to EU regulators and international regulators as well as legislative bodies and other stakeholders. And this in Europe, or members in Europe, roughly represent 90% of the Europe's oil and gas production. It's a quite significant share. So on the timeline, and I will not dwell that much into this, as Bastian already explained. I mean, we've entered the fourth year already, fourth year of legislative process. From the Commission proposing the methane strategy back in 2020 in October, to now having seen the final trilogue, which took place on the 14th of November, where the preliminary agreement was reached between the Parliament and the Council on the key issues. So the next step now is this Friday, where the member state representatives are expected to endorse this final text, or draft text, if you will, and then it will go to the Parliament for vote in both in January within the committee, and then February in the plenary session, and then finally the member states will have to approve this and sign it off at the Energy Council sometime in March or April, which really means that the regulation will not come into effect before that. So it will be the second quarter of next year, also pending legal checks and translations and so forth, as it is the case with all the other regulations. And again, to repeat what Bastian said, there's multiple implementing and delegated acts that will be set forward by the Commission, but also standardization process. So the Commission will delegate CEN or European standardization bodies, which includes CEN, to develop some of the technical details and prescriptions. So in the past 3 years or so, we've seen how much the regulation has developed from the very first draft that the Commission proposed. And here I will also not dwell, but there's these 3 main pillars to improve the data quality. So setting an MRV framework in place, to have robust methane mitigation action taken by operators in the space of LDAR, in the space of venting and flaring. And then, of course, reduce methane emissions also outside of the EU, because majority of those emissions that are associated with the gas that's used and consumed in Europe occurs outside of Europe. And this particular point I will speak shortly in a short brief moment. And then this is one of the points that has developed probably the most in terms of the content. On LDAR, here also sort of general overview of what has been preliminary agreed last or a few weeks ago, but then sort of the pre-final draft that we've seen last week that's been circulated around. So the main difference between what the Commission has proposed 2 or so years ago to what we see now is that there is not a one blanket approach to LDAR provisions, which is good. So there's differentiation between different components across the above ground, underground, distribution and transmission, as well as offshore components, which include below sea level and below seabed. So there's also differentiation between types of surveys, so type 1 and type 2, and this Bastian mentioned already. I have next slide also will show you sort of the overview of all of the different data points there. What's new we've seen, and this is something that Bastian didn't mention, is maybe less relevant for DSOs and TSOs, is the ability for operators to use advanced detection technologies. So these may include drones or continuous monitoring systems. There are certain criteria that these technologies have to meet before operators can use these technologies. So of course the repair thresholds, also ranging from 1 gram to 17 gram an hour, for example. And then obviously the repair, also a repair obligation that comes with it. And interestingly, so the delegated or implementing act that the Commission has to come up with, setting the minimum detection limits, those have to take into account repair thresholds. So it's very likely that those would be at the same levels, if not slightly lower, as we've seen in previous iterations of the text, where the detection thresholds were as low as 0.15 grams an hour. So that's something also to keep in mind. And then the last point here on good performance. So this is also something new that's been introduced by the Council, and we're happy to see that, is that the good performance will be awarded or rewarded by relaxing the periodic LDAR surveys that are prescribed by the regulation. So here, very busy slide. I'm not gonna, I don't intend to go over it, but this really underscores the complexity of the LDAR provisions alone. So here you see the frequencies in the sort of bigger section with different colors, and then you see various various follow-up actions that operators have to do. So you see that it's very, very complex process, and that's something that, you know, once we have final text, we still need to digest it properly. Again, you know, we also, our members have a lot of questions. There's a lot of uncertainty, a lot of clarification that needs to be sought. And some of it actually can be only resolved by competent authorities, because those competent authorities will be sort of the, you know, the people that the operators will be able to call or communicate to and ask questions. Less so of commission. So this is yet to be seen in the future. how some of the issues that we've seen will be clarified. On venting and flaring, so for upstream, quite important aspect here as well. You have your annual reportings of all the venting and flaring events. Only certain cases where venting and flaring is allowed, and these are in the case of emergency and malfunction, and there are specific criteria that needs to be met. What we're happy to see is that now, instead of having this AVO inspection, the audio visual olfactory inspection of flare stacks, which was proposed initially with the Commission, that now there is an alternative approach on the table, which is the remote and automated monitoring systems. Because in upstream perspective, if you take offshore platforms with AVO inspections, we really need to climb up those flares to inspect them closely in order to check all those boxes that are laid out in the annex, which really mean that the operator or the person servicing the flare stack has to be very up close to the flare stack, which poses safety hazards for the personnel, most importantly. So we're happy to see that there is this alternative approach which would not jeopardize the safety of the personnel. We have this point on the removal and destruction efficiency. So here is also finally being acknowledged that this is the sort of design element, that the efficiency can vary depending on different external factors, but as long as the flare is designed to meet this efficiency. So this has been acknowledged in the trilogues, which is a good sign. The issue here is that Commission proposed a complete removal destruction efficiency. Council proposed 98% and Parliament proposed 99%, and it seems that now the final text would most likely will have a reference to 99%, which is an issue because the gold standard in industry is to use 98% removal efficiency. So within 18 months, it means that operators would have to replace all of their flare stacks that are at 98% and below in order to meet this 1% increase. And the two other sort of technological standard mandates, which also Bastian touched upon earlier, is to have sort of the available zero emission devices being installed, and then also having to have the non-emitting alternatives in order to replace venting equipment where possible. So that takes me to the question, the discussion about wells, and then this, of course, is more centered, more relevant for producers, more upstream, of course. So here we've seen also quite a lot of development. Here, member states will have to establish inventory of all of the inactive wells, temporarily plugged wells, and permanently plugged and abandoned wells across their territories. In a lot of member states, that already is the case, where there is, these wells have been mapped because of the licensing regimes that are in Europe that are quite different from the US, for example. And then going forward, there will be annual reports that will have to be submitted by operator or member state, the relevant party. And then these annual reports, the focus really is on quantification again for those wells, both for onshore and offshore. And only where applicable, pressure monitoring could also serve as a data point. But really, quantification is the main data point that will have to be reported on to competent authorities on an annual basis for inactive wells and temporarily plugged wells. There are some exclusions. So if there are no methane emissions in onshore wells for the last 5 years, those wells can be excluded. And similarly, for offshore wells, if there's no methane emissions in the last 3 years, those inactive wells and temporarily plugged wells can be excluded from this obligation. At the beginning of the process, there was a risk that permanently plugged and abandoned wells are included in the scope of the regulation, which was an issue because we're talking about tens and tens of thousands of different wells across Europe that have been properly plugged and abandoned. As I mentioned, the licensing regime in Europe would require usually that operators plug these wells with 3 barriers at least, so the methane or the methane cannot escape the well from wellhead, and also the wellhead is cut off itself. So there is no way really that operators would be able to either quantify or place pressure monitoring on these wells, because there's just nothing there on the surface, right? If there is methane emissions detected, and sorry, let me go back to the permanently plugged and abandoned wells. So these are excluded by de facto, but if there is credible evidence of material methane emissions presented to competent authorities, then the specific well or wells would be subject to monitoring, or sorry, not monitoring, but remediation. And that also goes with other wells. If there is an issue, then the responsible party has to undertake the necessary measures for the remediation, reclamation, or plugging of those wells. And another exemption that we see is for offshore wells, and here wells that are located at the water depths greater than 700 meters. These wells may be exempt if there's evidence which shows that there's negligible impact on climate. And similarly for temporarily plugged wells and permanently plugged and abandoned wells that are in the water depths between 200 and 700 meters. So these wells could also be exempt if environmental assessment shows that there is negligible impact on climate from these wells. Let me go to imports. So one of the points that was not discussed by Bastian, and it might be quite interesting for you to hear. So the draft compromise on imports. So by default, on annual basis and within the first 9 months, importers would have to submit reports to competent authorities following the information that's required, which is set out in Annex 8. Rather qualitative information, but it's a bit more granular than what Commission proposed a couple of years ago in its proposal. But the new elements that have been introduced are the following. There is a phased-in approach now. So by 2026, there is this establishment of or collection of data and establishment of monitoring tool. So within this, the Commission will establish a public methane transparency database. So this is where all the information that the importers report on an annual basis will be stored, but also information that comes from other sources will be sort of aggregated. That would feed into this methane performance profile, which Commission would have to publish and then update it on a regular basis. The methane performance profile would be set for member states, for importers, for producers here in Europe, but also for third countries, their exporters and their producers. So it's quite comprehensive, comprehensive assessment that the Commission will have to underdo. On rapid reaction mechanism for super emitting events, here this is another point. So there's compared to Europe, there's quite a lot of super emitters outside in third countries, and that's easily seen from various satellite data, for example. So here the spotlight really is put on those super emitters, and if nothing changes, the super emitter event will be defined as above 100 kilograms an hour. So if there is such event identified by the Commission through various sources, then the Commission would then undertake diplomatic engagement through diplomatic channels with those third countries in order to remediate these super emitting events in those countries. And of course, so the fourth part there, Commission will also gather information from satellite data and other tools that are out there that could inform this database, this transparency database that the Commission will establish. By 2027, we will be looking at the MRV equivalency. Here, the Commission will be empowered to determine the equivalency, whether a third country or the producer is equivalent to those measures that we have here in EU. And this could either be the MRV, which is in line with Article 12 of the EU methane regulation. So if the producer in the third country undergoes the same sort of framework independently, or if there's a regulatory framework already established, or if the operator can provide evidence that the measurements or the MRV is undertaken in line with OGMP 2.0, and I forgot to add here level 5 more specifically. And only then the equivalency can be ensured, and only then there's a benefit that those imports are exempt from reporting requirements if this equivalency is proven. And then another significant milestone, and so the last one here, it's by 2030, is for Commission to establish a methane intensity obligation. So here the Commission in the earlier days acknowledged the very difficult nature of establishing both either a target or either a performance standard, because we just lack consistent data on a global level, more so. So really, we're happy to see that there has been this phased-in approach, and that the MRV, sort of global MRV framework is positioned as a priority first, because it's really important that we're able to compare data, that we're comparing apples with apples and not apples with pears or bananas, but that there is consistent data available there. And within this context, Commission will adopt a methodology for calculating the methane intensity at a producer level. And then by 2030, there will be a maximum binding methane emission value set for importers. And this will be for contracts which have been concluded or renewed 6 years after the regulation comes into effect. So essentially, from next year, it will be by 2030. Which is also a positive point. So the previous slides were sort of overview what's in there. The next two slides, just briefly want to touch on perspective from upstream and what we see are the issues. So within the scope of the LDAR obligations, so I mentioned that there is now an obligation for subsea and subseabed components. So we point to the fact that quantification, which essentially is required in the scope of Article 14, because operators have to meet a certain threshold, minimum detection threshold, a repair threshold, which implies that there has to be a quantification in place. We point that there is no quantification technology that exists today that can do this task in the subsea environment, and this is proven by the Carbon Limits report, and I believe the Carbon Limits was also presenting in the previous Methane Mondays webinar, which is quite interesting. So their report also found that these technologies just do not exist. So operators in offshore context, in subsea and subseabed context, cannot meet the requirements that are set out by the regulation. The second point is, as I said, we're happy to see that the advanced detection technologies are recognized finally in the regulation. We've seen this has also been the case in EPA and also the case in Canada and in their federal regulation on methane reduction. But there is this limited criteria, which basically makes this technology useless in this regulation. Because such technology cannot be applied at point source level of components, which is one of the criteria. And this technology cannot meet the same minimum detection limits, which is also set by one of the criteria set by this regulation. So essentially, these criteria would have to be dropped for this technology to be useful in this context. So what we've always pointed out is that it should be the better the outcome or the better abatement potential that should determine if the technology should be used or not by operators together with the periodic LDAR surveys. And of course, if there is a better abatement potential, then we would be also looking into having some sort of flexibilities in terms of these periodic LDAR surveys that have to be carried out with handheld devices. Because as we always mention, is that these advanced technologies can find the big leaks quickly, within a few minutes, within a few hours, instead of letting operators wait on possibly 3 or 4 or 5 months before they can pick up the possible leak, which has been bleeding already for quite some time. So in terms of the environmental outcome, it's much better that these technologies are recognized and then the criteria is meaningful and doesn't jeopardize the use of these technologies. Another point here on LDAR, and this is on low repair thresholds. So there was a question whether these thresholds will stay, and my take is that these thresholds, repair thresholds, are set in place. There has been a lot of discussion around it and a lot of moving parts, but it seems that these values will be there to stay. But we just want to point out that the 1 gram an hour repair threshold is 14 times lower than emissions from one dairy cow here in Europe. So it's a very minor, not important, but very minor. And what we've always advocated for, that the focus really is on big leaks first, so that the operators are able to prioritize their repair actions rather than go after very minuscule leaks that don't contribute that much to the climate compared to the bigger leaks, which should be addressed immediately or as soon as possible. And then the last slide here, another points on some of the concerns and here venting and flaring in wells. Again, on venting and flaring, there's a shortfall that the regulation does not recognize for safety flaring, which is an integral part of flare stacks used in our operations. And here we're talking about the pilot flame or the purge gas flames, which have to be on constantly, either in order for the flame to be lit immediately in case there is some sort of issue, or in case of the purge gas, that the flare stack, in the flare stack, there is no possibility that the oxygen basically enters from the top and causes possible explosions. So this is one of the points that still has not been recognized by the regulation, at least throughout the trilogues. On Article 17.1, this is on flare stack and removal, flare stack removal and destruction efficiency. And here I touched already, gaining the 1 percentage point we think is disproportionate. And again, the last point here on subsea wells, again, the annual reporting of quantification of subsea wells is also not technically implementable because such technology doesn't exist. We rather ask that the pressure monitoring is permitted as an alternative and not as an additional point or obligation for operators. And here are just the recommendations, the same points I've mentioned earlier in the previous 2 slides. I will not go over them. Be mindful of the time. But I stop here. Thanks for listening. Please feel free to raise your questions or reflections. I will do my best to answer them.
Thank you very much, Emils, for this actually complimentary presentation, but it was meant to be like that from pipeline operators to producers. And we have actually immediate 2 questions by Maria. So Maria, if you would like to please ask them directly, better than I read it.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Karina. But I think I have nothing more to add, because actually Emils already addressed all the questions in the second part of the presentation. So the questions were basically about the most challenging elements of the regulation from the upstream segment perspective, And also there was a question about these alternative detection methods. So I think you already addressed them. Maybe just one bonus question, if I may. It's about the import requirements. So if my understanding is correct, so by 2030, what the regulation says, we will have some sort of methane supply index. But you had also like the information on the same slide. My understanding is that it will apply mostly to the new contracts in contrast to existing contracts. Is that correct?
Indeed, yes. Thanks for the question. Indeed, so that will apply to contracts contracted or renewed 60 years after the regulation comes into effect. So from next year until 2030, basically, that's 6 years. So yeah, indeed, from 2030, that's when the methane intensity would apply. The issue is with equivalency, MRV equivalency. And because there, even though the equivalency obligation would kick in from 2027, there, at least in the text that we've seen so far, that obligation will apply for contracts already concluded as soon as the regulation comes into effect from next year. And that's an issue because you cannot place an obligation on something, or you cannot conclude something in your contract if you don't know what the obligation entirely will be in the future. So again, this is something also that will have to be changed. Perhaps legal services will be more mindful of it and improve this part that this MRV equivalency will only apply then once the obligation is officially set in 2027, once the Commission comes up with these delegated implementing acts.
Thank you. Just maybe if I can a follow-up question. Did Commission specify what equivalency mean?
Yeah, so they focus, so either the MRV framework is in line with MRV that's here in Europe, so Article 12, or that the operators use OGMP 2.0 level 5 reporting. So that would count as equivalent in the eyes of the European Commission. But at the end of the day, it's the Commission that will basically assess and decide what is equivalent, what isn't equivalent. And my understanding is that there is also quite a lot of diplomatic outreach to be had between the countries. And the priority will be given to those countries now first that are the biggest in the space of LNG, for example, that are the biggest exporters or importers into Europe. So in a way that the Commission covers most of the imports as soon as possible. But the OGMP 5.0 level, that's one of the aspects. And then obviously equivalency to the Article 12 and EU methane regulation is another aspect. With other areas, I mean, it's probably quite difficult to quantify, for example, whether EPA methane rule would be seen as equivalent. And that's a detail that's not evident in this Article 27 of the Commission proposal. So it's yet to be seen. One of those points that Bastian said is yet to be seen how it evolves.
Thank you, Emils. I don't see raised hand. Just comment from Maria. Anyhow, we are kind of in 10 minutes plus, but I think that it was worth. And with that, I would really like to thank to both presenters, to both organizations, being ready to express views and to explain the text of regulation as it stands now, even if it's still not final. So let's see with these non-defined points how it will turn out in the second quarter of 2024. With that, I am really glad that through 3 years, we tackled many issues, and at that time it was idea, okay, this is all preparation for regulation, and we will kind of cover all possible topics. It seems that this is not the case, that it's going to be more topics to elaborate, to discuss, being technology, being way of doing, being experience, or even reporting issues. So for that, we will see what to do with Methane Mondays 2.0 next year, and especially having in mind this regulation, but also having in mind Global Methane Pledge and results from COP. So with that, thank you very much for being patient. Thank you very much for following Methane Mondays. It still seems as valid and useful tool. Stay well, stay healthy, have a nice December, nice entrance into 2024, and stay tuned, and let's see what will come next in the next year. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye. Bye.